And I now give the floor to the ambassador of the Russian Federation, Vassily.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the personal participation in this meeting of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Colombia, Carlos Holmes Trujillo. We believe that this is extremely important given the Secretary General's assessment that the peace process in Colombia is a very critical stage. Well, at the risk of attracting your ire, Mr. President, I would nonetheless thank Ms. Rosa Salamanca and the head of the United Nations Verification Mission in the country, Mr. Carlos Reyes-Messieu, for presenting their report and their detailed briefing on the latest developments in the country in the last 3 months. Russia has always been a friend of Colombia and Colombians. As a permanent member of the Security Council, we have unfailingly provided support to the Colombian peace process and intend to continue doing so. And we are very encouraged by the fact that Colombia's first steps towards a sustainable peace have already become an inspiration for many other problem regions. At the same time, when we call ourselves friends of Colombia, what we mean is that a friend isn't somebody who says only what the other wants to hear. So we will be frank and we'll say what we believe it is important to say. We are concerned by the situation around the Colombian peace process, and we fully agree with the assessments in the SG's report about the country being at a major crossroads. In the 2.5 years following the signing of the life-changing final peace agreement, much has been done to consolidate peace in the country. And today it is important not to make any steps back and not to allow any rollbacks in this peace progress, which is the only right way forward for the country. In that connection, we are extremely concerned by the alarming assessments in the SG's report, as well as those of other international stakeholders in connection with Bogota's decision to send back the statutory law of the SGP for refinement. We know that that decision spurred more than 150 public organizations to call for a nationwide strike. We share that concern, and we call Antonio Guterres' call for the statutory law of the SGP to be adopted as soon as possible. We certainly appreciate the explanations of Minister Trujillo, who came personally to New York to meet with council members and provided a detailed briefing on the motivations behind the proposed changes. We respect this, and in no way do we intend to interfere in internal Colombian processes. At the same time, in turning and appealing to the Security Council, Colombians entrusted us, its members, with a major share of responsibility for the success of the peace process, and it is our common duty to live up to that trust. That is why the Security Council and the Secretary General adopted a decision to use their authority to bolster the final peace agreement, its specific text, and all the key provisions, including the special jurisdiction for peace. And it is extremely important now for the agreements that were reached then to be complied with without any amendments. I won't go into detail about the critical assessments contained in the report. There's a fairly large number of them. One of the key elements of the peace program, for example, a comprehensive agrarian reform, has still not taken final shape. The complex tangle of problems related to ensuring security in territories where central government is poorly represented. There is a lack of progress in the legal, socioeconomic, and political reintegration of former combatants. The crop substitution program is also stalling. Regrettably, we did not see any optimistic signals in the report regarding dialogue between the government and armed groups. We unequivocally condemned the terrorist act of January 17, but we are convinced that a sustainable settlement can only be achieved through direct dialogue with those who can hold talks and are willing to come to an agreement. We also see insufficient progress in the legal, socioeconomic, and political reintegration of former combatants. One issue that remains urgent is their security and employment. This is leading to an increase in the number of dissidents. Demining and humanitarian programs are faltering, and incidents have been noted of the remining of previously cleared territories. Mr. President, there are other worrying assessments that for some reason did not make their way into the report or were not given due attention. Thus, we are beginning to note hotbeds of discontent of the population related to lags in the implementation of key provisions of the peace agreement. For instance, in the south west of the country, the indigenous population blocked one of the country's main transport corridors, the Pan American Highway, for nearly a month. We see attempts being made by armed groups to take advantage of this situation. They're resorting to terror with regards to the indigenous population. Thus, further fueling discontent. Another acute issue for Colombia is IDPs. Half a century of conflict has led to more than 7 million people being displaced. That is every sixth person in the country. And unfortunately, that indicator continues to worsen. We understand that Colombia is under additional pressure with the influx of refugees from Venezuela, and we believe that the international community must help Bogota address this. However, the developments around Venezuela should not become a factor that hinders the implementation of the final peace agreement. We also note the assessments of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, namely that the difficulties with human rights in the country also directly related to setbacks in the implementation of the final peace agreement. We can also not ignore the views of the ICRC about the fact that the current situation in the country is even more complex than when the Havana peace agreement was signed. At least 5 internal armed conflicts persist and are even intensifying in Colombia. 4 large anti-government groups are taking part in these conflicts, and according to the Ministry of Defense of Colombia, they bring together some 10,000 combatants. Meanwhile, we remember from the SG's reports that the number of ex-combatants who have taken up arms again by the end of 2018 came to nearly 2,000. These include 2 top military leaders and a large number of field commanders. In this highly sensitive situation, it is extremely important to restore trust towards the peace process among those who have been complying with their obligations under it in good faith. As friends of Colombia, we must be frank and say that the international community, the UN, and the Security Council expect that the current Colombian administration will strictly comply with its implementations as part of the final peace agreement. We, of course, are satisfied with the Secretary General's assessment that the political leadership is committed to the peace progress, but we urge for further progress. There is a need to consolidate and further build on progress with consultations at every stage with signatories to the agreement. Without this, it'll be difficult to put an end to the armed conflict. To conclude, I would like to reiterate that the Security Council has repeatedly noted that Colombia is a poster child, an example for how international assistance can and should be provided in close cooperation with the host government playing a leading role, and with a responsible attitude on the part of the whole of society. It is precisely the national ownership demonstrated by the Colombian people and their desire to seek a sustainable political solution that has made peace in the country possible. We trust that the United Nations verification mission in Colombia, which we support, will continue making its contribution to the implementation of the final peace agreement and play a major role in assisting the reintegration of former FARC combatants into political life and peaceful life. Thank you.
I thank the Russian ambassador for his statement. And